Welcome to Twisted Truths, where betrayal meets brutal payback, and where the most unexpected twists expose what people are really capable of. This story isn't just shocking, it's personal. My name is Glenn Harwood, and this story still makes my stomach twist every time I think about it. I'm 34 now, living in Seattle, but I wasn't born with a silver spoon or some genius business idea. I worked my way up from dirt. I'm the founder and CEO of a health tech company called Betrayal, focused on streamlining hospital systems across the West Coast. We've saved hospitals millions. And through it all, I kept one truth in mind. I'd never go back to being the son who was seen as too sensitive, too soft, or not built for business. I grew up in Evanston, Illinois. My parents, Marjorie and Calvin Harwood, ran a mid-sized textile company that had been in our family for generations. Harwood Threads. If the name sounds quaint, that's because it was. Stubborn, traditional, and rigid to the point of suffocation. I was never their golden child. That was my brother, Curtis. 3 years younger, but always the charmer. Smooth talker. Big smile. Big promises. Zero follow-through. To the outside world, we were the perfect family. Inside, my father made sure I knew how much of a disappointment I was for not taking over the family business. My mother's love always came with strings. And Curtis just knew how to manipulate both of them. I left at 18 and never looked back. Full scholarship to Berkeley. Slept in my car at one point. Took on 3 jobs. Ate stale bread and canned soup for months just to fund my startup idea. I failed. Then failed again. Then finally, Betrayal took off. 1 viral case study, 1 TEDx talk, and 2 investment rounds later, I was worth over $40 million. The moment I hit Forbes' top under 35 in healthcare innovation, everything changed. Not for me. For them. It started with a congratulatory text from Curtis. Then a call from my mom, "We're so proud of you, sweetheart." And then, from my dad, a cold email with a subject line that said, "Family legacy at risk. Your help needed." I didn't respond. Because I knew where this was heading. I'd warned them before, I would not be their emergency fund. But they didn't stop. Calls. Emails. Voicemails that began sweet, then turned sour. "After all we've done for you. You're letting your grandfather's legacy die. What would he say if he saw you turning your back?" That guilt. It almost worked. Almost. Until the emergency came. It was a Tuesday morning. I was in the middle of prepping for a speaking engagement at Stanford when I got the call. It was Curtis, sounding breathless, panicked. "Glenn, Mom's in the hospital. It's her heart. She's not doing good, man. She asked for you." Everything in me froze. For all their flaws, I loved my mother. I dropped everything. Cancelled the talk. Rebooked my week. And flew to Chicago the same night. When I walked into St. Adelaide's hospital, she was in a hospital gown, pale, hooked up to N4. Curtis sat beside her, eyes red-rimmed. My father stood by the window, stiff as a statue. I felt the guilt sink in like quicksand. "Glenn," my mother croaked. "You came." I took her hand. Of course I came. The next few days were a blur of family dinners, vague updates, and closed-door conversations between my father and Curtis. I didn't press. I was too focused on making sure Mom was okay. She kept saying things like, "Your father's under so much pressure. The company, it's not doing well. Glenn, if you could just help out, just this once." And then, the pitch came. Sitting in their oversized living room, my father laid out the numbers. The company needed a $5 million bridge loan. "Not a gift," he said. "Just a show of faith." They even had legal documents drafted. Curtis, of course, added. You'd be saving the family, bro. I mean, who else can? It should have felt noble. But something didn't add up. The timing. The way the doctor at the hospital seemed unsure when I asked follow-up questions. The way Curtis's hands were always shaking, but not from sadness. That night, I called the hospital directly. Not the number they gave me. And when I got transferred to the attending physician, what he said froze my blood. Marjorie Harwood? No, sir, she's perfectly stable. Tests show no cardiac episode. She insisted on an overnight stay for monitoring. Standard checkup, really. I didn't respond. I just stared at the wall in my hotel room, heart pounding. It was all a lie. They faked a medical emergency, my mother faked a heart condition, just to manipulate me into handing over $5 million. My throat closed. Not from sadness. But from rage. Because they didn't just lie. They used my love against me. That's when I made a decision. I wouldn't just walk away. I was going to burn the lies to the ground, and make sure they knew exactly who they underestimated. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I couldn't, but because my body wouldn't let me. I lay in that stiff hotel bed with the city's orange streetlights bleeding through the blinds, my heart thudding like it was trying to escape my chest. They lied. They staged a hospital stay. Faked panic. Weaponized my mother's health. For what? Money. My own family saw me not as a son, not even as a human being, but as a dollar sign. The next morning, I went back to the hospital. Not to yell. Not to confront. But to observe. I stood by the door, just outside her room. I watched my mother sit up in bed, scrolling on her phone, perfectly fine. Laughing at something Curtis said. Her color looked better than mine. And then I heard her say it. He's here, right where we need him. Calvin just has to get him to sign the check. We'll have the money by Friday. I felt like the floor disappeared beneath me. There was no pretending. No mistaken intent. This wasn't a desperate act of survival. This was a con. By my mother. By Curtis. By my father. It hit me like a fist to the ribs. These weren't just manipulations. This was deliberate. Practiced. I stumbled back down the hallway and out of that hospital like a ghost. My lungs didn't feel like they worked anymore. How do you process that the people who raised you, who kissed your forehead goodnight, who made you soup when you were sick, orchestrated an entire performance to rob you blind? I didn't answer their calls. Not even Curtis's fake concerned texts. Hey bro, you okay? Haven't seen you since this morning. You ghosting us now? Yes, Curtis. Yes, I was ghosting you. Because I needed time. To think. To process. But more importantly. To plan. Because one thing was becoming clear. They didn't know who I was anymore. They thought I was still the insecure, eager to please oldest son who would cave under guilt and sign whatever they handed me. But the truth was. I had become someone else entirely. That night, I poured myself a drink, something I rarely do. Sat on the edge of the bed. And I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I cried. Not because they got one over on me. But because I finally accepted the truth I had been avoiding for years. My family never loved me for who I am. Only for what I could do for them. That's a heartbreak you don't recover from in a weekend. It's a truth that settles into your bones, sharp and cold. I opened my laptop and wrote down everything. Dates. Names. What the doctor had said. What I overheard. I wasn't just sad anymore. I was building a case. And when I started digging into their company, Harwood Threads, I found a whole other layer of rot. Late invoices. Lawsuits. Unpaid contractors. And most interesting of all, two shell companies tied to Curtis's name, receiving six-figure consulting fees from the main business account. I sat back in my chair and whispered, "What the hell are you doing, little brother?" I downloaded copies of every financial report I could find. Pulled court filings. Ran names through business databases. I wasn't just building a case now. I was preparing for war. Because the moment they made me believe my mother was dying just to trick me, they signed the warrant for their own downfall. You ever get that feeling like your whole life was a movie, and you just stumbled into the scene where the hero finds out the villain has been living in the same house all along? That was me. After hours of digging through financial reports, public records, and quiet conversations with people who used to work at Harwood Threads, I stumbled on something that made everything before it look like child's play. It started with an anonymous email tip. Subject line: "You might want to look at Oakbridge Ventures." No body. No name. Just that. At first, I thought it was spam. But something told me, trust your gut. I ran a search. Oakbridge Ventures was listed as a private consulting firm based out of Evanston. The registered owner? Some guy named Darrell Phelps. Never heard of him. But when I cross-checked Oakbridge's deposits against Harwood Threads expense reports, I froze. Over the last 18 months, nearly $3.8 million had been transferred from Harwood Threads to Oakbridge Ventures in the form of advisory fees, brand consultations, and strategic development. None of those things existed. And then I found the thread that unraveled everything. Darrell Phelps had a daughter. She was listed as co-manager of the LLC. Her name? Amber Curtis Harwood. I leaned back, heart pounding. My brother had a daughter. A daughter no one in our family had ever mentioned. Not once. And then it hit me. Curtis created a fake firm, using his girlfriend, or wife, or whoever she was, to funnel money out of our parents' company. He wasn't just freeloading anymore. He was embezzling. I couldn't breathe. This wasn't about them manipulating me for $5 million anymore. This was about how far the rot had gone. How deep. I dug deeper. And found tax evasion. Misuse of employee pension funds. Fake payroll entries for people who didn't exist. It wasn't just Curtis. It was my father too. I found his name attached to every major approval. Digital signatures that matched. A paper trail that showed he knew exactly what was happening. He wasn't being tricked. He was helping Curtis pull it off. And my mother? I wasn't sure yet. But I remembered her words in the hospital. "We'll have the money by Friday." That wasn't the voice of someone being fooled. That was the voice of someone in on it. And suddenly, I remembered something else, something that made my skin crawl. When I was a kid, I used to overhear my parents arguing late at night. One night, my mom said through gritted teeth, "If we lose this business, it's not just money. It's our leverage." I never understood what she meant. But now I did. They didn't see family as love. They saw family as currency. Power. Control. And I had been their biggest missed investment, until now. I closed my laptop and stared at the ceiling of my hotel room, every nerve in my body buzzing. I wasn't just the estranged son anymore. I was the only one in the family not committing a felony. I couldn't go to the police, not yet. Not without bulletproof proof. But I had enough to start planning something better. Something bigger. Not just revenge. Exposure. They wanted to humiliate me into submission. I was going to humiliate them into silence. But I needed help. So I made a call. "James, it's Glenn. I need you." James Porter was my old college roommate. Now. He's one of the most cutthroat corporate lawyers in Seattle. And one of the only people I trust. Tell me everything, he said, without missing a beat. By the time I was done, he was silent. Then he said 3 words I'll never forget. Let's end them. Let's end them. Those 3 words from James weren't just comforting, they were clarifying. Because the moment I heard them, something inside me shifted. I stopped feeling like the wounded son. I became something else. A strategist. A surgeon. A storm. The first thing we did was organize. We set up a secure file sharing system. Everything I had, emails, screenshots, transfers, tax inconsistencies, even the hospital recordings, went into a locked digital vault James's team encrypted. I'm not building a case, I told James. I'm building a reckoning. And he said, then let's make it bulletproof. He brought in 2 people. A forensic accountant named Maureen Cho, whose resume read like a checklist of corporate takedowns, and a media consultant named Erica Vega, who used to work in crisis management for Fortune 500 CEOs, now specializing in reputation reversal. But we weren't trying to reverse anything. We were going to ruin them. We worked out of my Seattle apartment for a week straight. Pacing floors, eating takeout, connecting dots on whiteboards. Curtis's fake shell companies, my father's hidden overseas accounts, and even a property they'd quietly purchased in Palm Springs using diverted company funds. But that wasn't enough. I didn't just want financial exposure. I wanted the truth exposed where they could never run from it. So I flew back to Evanston under the guise of needing more time to think about the investment. I was met with fake smiles and carefully disguised desperation. My mother hugged me at the door. You look tired, Glenn. You should stay longer. Rest. I looked into her eyes, searching for remorse. There was none. Just calculation. My father barely said 2 words the first night. Curtis slapped me on the back and whispered, "You're a good man, bro, doing the right thing for the family." I wanted to scream. But I didn't. Because I had a plan. That week, I met secretly with 3 current Harwood Threads employees. 2 were warehouse supervisors. 1 was in HR. All 3 told me the same thing: morale was at an all-time low, employees were being laid off silently, and Curtis's girlfriend, Amber, was visiting the factory under a fake title, brand consultant. One worker said something that stuck with me. I gave 20 years to this place. But lately, it feels like they're gutting it for sport. I paid for their lunch. Slipped each of them my burner number. Promised confidentiality. And I meant it. Then came the hardest part of all. Reaching out to my grandfather's old partner. His name was William Pierce, and he was once my grandfather's best friend and co-founder, until my dad bought him out 2 decades ago after a bitter disagreement. I tracked him down in a small retirement community outside Des Moines. "Glenn Harwood?" he asked when I called. Didn't think I'd ever hear that name again without cursing. "I need to talk to you," I said. "About what your old friend and his family turned the company into." The next day, I was sitting across from William on a sun porch overlooking a frozen pond. His hands trembled slightly, but his mind? Sharp as a razor. When I laid out what I'd found, he didn't interrupt once. Then he looked at me and said, "Your grandfather would be ashamed. And Calvin, he always wanted control. But I never thought he'd sell the soul of what we built." He handed me something I didn't expect, an original contract from the company's founding. It included a legacy clause. A clause that said if the company's ethics or labor practices ever fell below legal standards, and if proven in court, the majority shareholder had the right to dissolve the leadership board and call for a full audit and legal review. My heart pounded. Because I knew something they didn't. Thanks to a forgotten clause in the family trust, I was technically the largest shareholder. When I left the sun porch that day, William shook my hand and said, "Burn it to the ground, son. Then build something better." And that's exactly what I intended to do. Back in Seattle, James and Erica put the final touches on what we called Operation Mirror. I would return to Evanston in 1 week. I would tell my family I was ready to invest. They would host a dinner. Invite a few close partners. Pretend they'd always believed in me. They wouldn't know that every word they said would be recorded. That 3 reporters would be sitting nearby, under the guise of family friends. That the next day, every dirty detail would go public. But first, I had to get them to incriminate themselves. And for that, I needed to play the one card I had left. Their pride. I walked into the Harwood family estate wearing a suit I hadn't touched in years. Dark charcoal, clean cut. No tie. Just enough edge to look like someone who didn't belong anymore, yet owned the place anyway. Curtis greeted me at the door like we hadn't drifted into full-blown enemies. Look at this guy. Man of the hour. He gave me a too-hard pat on the back, reeking of cheap cologne and desperation. His grin didn't reach his eyes. I forced a smile. It's good to be home. Lies, all of it. Because that night, as the family gathered around for the celebratory dinner I'd agreed to attend, they had no idea the walls were closing in. Everything was in place. My lawyer James had coordinated with 3 investigative journalists, undercover, attending as friends of the family, and Curtis's contacts from out of town. Erica, our media consultant, had arranged for the entire dinner to be recorded through hidden mics embedded in the table centerpiece and even in my own blazer. Every document, every lie, every laugh, it was all going on record. I was tired of letting them tell the world who I was. Tonight, I was taking back the story. Dinner was elegant. Too elegant. Candlelit chandeliers. Imported wines. Lobster flown in from Maine. Curtis stood to toast halfway through, his voice syrupy and smug. Tonight, we celebrate family. And more importantly, the future of Harwood Threads. With Glenn's generous investment, we're going to take this company global. Applause. I looked around the table. My father was beaming. My mother dabbing her eyes like she'd won the lottery. I raised my glass. To the future, I said. But in my head. To your downfall. They still had no clue I knew everything. No clue I'd already gathered ironclad evidence of embezzlement, labor violations, and financial fraud. What they didn't know was that William Pierce's legacy clause, backed by the forensic data we uncovered, was already in the hands of a federal investigator. Tonight was about getting them on record. Their egos would do the rest. And sure enough, they started to talk. Curtis leaned into one of the journalists, smirking. Look, man. Business is messy, right? Sometimes you gotta move money through different channels. Consulting fees, whatever. Who's gonna check? Then my father chimed in. These employees nowadays are too soft. Back in the day, nobody asked for health insurance or fair overtime. They just worked. Now they want bonuses for breathing. He laughed. My mother sipped her wine. Curtis again. And the undocumented workers? Please. They should be thankful we give them anything. Nobody's getting hurt. We're just creative with payroll. It was all there. The arrogance. The criminality. The inhumanity. I excused myself halfway through dessert and stepped out into the garden. My heart was pounding, not with nerves, but rage. I looked up at the stars and whispered. You did this, Grandpa. You gave me the key. I'm about to unlock the door. I stepped back in. Looked around. And said, calmly. I have something to say. Everyone turned. I've thought a lot about this investment. About this family. And I've decided. They leaned forward. I'm not giving you a damn dime. Silence. My father's face drained of color. Curtis blinked like I'd slapped him. What? My mother whispered. I pulled a thick folder from my coat. Placed it in the center of the table. That's a copy of every illegal transfer. Every fake invoice. Every labor violation you committed under this roof. And by the way, you're being recorded. Right now. Gasps. One of the reporters clicked a button under the table. The tiny red light glowed. Smile for the press, I added. You just confessed. Curtis stood up. This is a setup. I cut him off. No, Curtis. This is justice. My father tried to reach for the folder. I stopped him cold. Touch that, and I call the police, right now. You've got 48 hours to prepare. An external audit is coming. Federal agents have already received the files. And thanks to the legacy clause in Grandpa's contract. I looked him dead in the eyes. I own the majority voting rights now. My mother gasped. Glenn, no. Oh yes, I said, voice like ice. You faked a medical emergency to manipulate me. You nearly destroyed everything Grandpa built. Now, I'm going to fix it. Curtis cursed. My father's fists clenched. I turned to the journalists, no longer undercover. You got what you need? One of them nodded. Every word. The morning after the dinner, I should have felt triumphant. After all, I had turned the tide. Exposed their lies. Brought their house of cards crashing down in front of witnesses. The federal inquiry was now in motion. Journalists were already drafting headlines. I even received a call from William Pierce that morning. Your grandfather would have been proud, son. But as I stood by my hotel window, coffee in hand, watching the gray Evanston skyline, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Too quiet. Too still. And when the storm's too still, you're usually standing in its eye. The first tremor hit around noon. James, my attorney, called with an edge in his voice I'd never heard before. Glenn. You're not going to like this. Curtis just filed an emergency injunction against the company's leadership change. What? I snapped. He's claiming you're mentally unfit to make corporate decisions, citing stress, emotional instability, and, get this, unresolved childhood trauma that impacts judgment. My jaw tightened. You've got to be kidding. He included statements from your mother. And your father. The blood in my veins turned cold. I sat down, stunned, the betrayal slicing deeper than any of their scams. My own mother, after everything, had submitted a notarized affidavit questioning my mental stability. I asked James, can he actually stop the audit? James hesitated. Delay it? Possibly. He's banking on dragging this through the courts, muddying the waters, and claiming you're staging a hostile takeover. And the board? Most of them resigned after your evidence. But a few, friends of your father, are holding out. Hoping this lawsuit buys them time. It all started to make sense. Curtis had known. He suspected I'd find everything. So he prepared a backup plan. Not a legal defense. A smear campaign. And worst of all, he was using my past against me. My time in therapy. My struggles with burnout. The article I'd written last year about dealing with suicidal thoughts during my startup's early days. Everything I'd shared to help others. They twisted it into a weapon. That night, I received an email from Curtis. No subject line. Just 3 words. Not so fast. Attached was a grainy photo of me from college, shirtless at a party, visibly drunk, slumped on a couch. Then a second photo. Me leaving a therapist's office. Time-stamped. Then a draft article, clearly meant to leak, accusing me of being unstable, vindictive, and dangerous for business. They weren't just trying to stop me. They were trying to ruin me. Make the world believe I was the villain. Rewrite the story before I could finish telling it. I stared at the screen, the fury building so fast it made my vision blur. But then, something else rose to the surface. Not fear. Not anger. Clarity. They wanted to destroy me through shame. They had no idea who I'd become. I called Erica, my media consultant. Leak it, I said. She paused. What do you mean? Leak everything. The therapy. The burnout. The mistakes. My full story. On my terms. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "That's bold." "No," I replied. "That's truth." Within 24 hours, a full exposé appeared under my name on Medium, with the headline. My family faked a heart attack to steal $5 million, and when I fought back, they called me crazy. I told everything. How they tricked me. Lied to me. Staged a crisis. And how they were now using my past mental health challenges to discredit me. The piece went viral. Tens of thousands of shares. People rallied around me, not out of pity, but out of recognition. Because everyone had seen this kind of story before. And they were tired of letting abusers write the last word. Suddenly, Curtis's plan collapsed. Reporters hounded him. The judge fast-tracked the injunction case. And the Federal Labor Commission called to confirm they'd received full corroborating documents, including notarized proof from employees now coming forward in droves. But the real twist? That came when a whistleblower inside Harwood Threads leaked something even I hadn't seen. A plan to dissolve the company quietly and move all remaining assets into a Cayman Islands account, under Curtis's name. He wasn't just trying to stop me. He was trying to vanish. Steal what was left. Torch the family name. And disappear. He'd forged my father's signature to make it happen. When my father found out, he cracked. I was sitting in a courtroom in downtown Evanston the day everything came to a head. Rain drizzled outside the windows, streaking the glass like the city itself was washing off the dirt. Curtis sat at the defense table, pale and visibly shaken. Gone was the smirking golden boy with slick back hair and an ego that filled every room. He looked like a man caught naked in a spotlight. My father sat behind him, arms crossed, face hardened, not with defiance, but shame. He hadn't spoken to me since the night the whistleblower's documents dropped. But I'd heard through James that the moment he saw the forged signatures, his own son stealing from him, something in him broke. He withdrew from Curtis's side immediately. Even submitted a sworn statement confirming Curtis's offshore fraud attempt. My mother didn't come to court. Her silence cut the deepest. She hadn't apologized. Hadn't even tried. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was pride. Or maybe, as I'd finally started to accept, she was exactly who I feared she was all along. The judge read the charges. Fraud. Embezzlement. Labor violations. Attempted illegal asset transfer. And with a steady voice said, "The court finds Curtis Harwood guilty on all counts. Sentencing to be scheduled." I should have smiled. I should have felt victorious. Instead, I looked at Curtis, this brother I once built pillow forts with, who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, and all I felt was a quiet, hollow ache. He glanced at me once as the bailiff placed cuffs around his wrists. His lips parted, like he might speak. But he didn't. And I didn't need him to. Outside the courthouse, the media swarmed. But I gave only one interview, to a young journalist who had been kind, quiet, and consistent. When she asked, "What do you hope happens next?" I surprised myself with my answer. I hope the company heals. I hope the workers finally get the dignity they deserve. And I hope, one day, my family understands why I did this, not for revenge, but because someone had to stop the cycle. The months that followed were hard. Messy. And sometimes lonely. But they were also honest. With Curtis facing prison time and my parents stepping down in disgrace, I took full control of Harwood Threads. Not to own it, but to rebuild it. I brought in a new board, diverse, experienced, grounded. We audited every department. Gave back pay to wronged employees. Created scholarships for their kids. Converted the factory into a model for sustainable, ethical production. I worked with my grandfather's old partner, William, to restore what the Harwood name once stood for. And slowly, the scars began to turn into something stronger than skin. They became armor. 6 months later, my father showed up at the factory. No cameras. No press. Just an aging man with slumped shoulders, holding a box. "I thought you might want this," he said. Inside the box were photographs. Of my grandfather. His war medals. The original deed to the first Harwood warehouse. And a letter, written in my father's handwriting. He didn't hand it to me. He just said, "Read it when you're ready." And he walked away. I haven't read it yet. But I will. Someday. Maybe. Curtis was sentenced to 7 years, eligible for parole in 4. I don't know if I'll ever visit him. But I do think about what I'd say. Maybe something simple. Maybe. You could have had a legacy, too. All you had to do was be honest. Now, I run both Vitacor and Harwood Threads. But I don't chase headlines anymore. I chase integrity. I sponsor mental health programs in every company I run. I speak at high schools. I mentor first-generation college students. Because the truth is, it wasn't the betrayal that defined me. It was the moment I chose not to become like them. I still carry the pain. The ache of being used. Lied to. Called unstable for having the nerve to heal. But I also carry something else now. Peace. In the end, truth has a way of surfacing, even if it comes twisted through pain and betrayal. As one wise voice once said, sometimes your greatest enemy was once your closest ally. If this story struck a chord with you, let us know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe, share, and spread the word, because justice deserves to be heard.